All right, hey everybody. My name is Connor Austin. I'm a coastal scientist with Woodhull Group. If you're familiar faces, we've had a couple of meetings on Zoom. We had a walk on the beach, East Beach, a month ago. But we're happy to be here with a bit more information, talk to you all about East Beach specifically. We are doing a barrier beach management plan. This is across Westport. There are other beaches involved, but the meeting tonight is just specific to East Beach. We will hold another meeting later in about early August on Atlantic Ave, Beach Ave, Elephant Rock Beach, and the Double. So Michael and Maria gives a quick breakdown, but we started this project in about February. We're funded by Coastal Zone Management and Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Programs. These groups have all been working together over the past months to do a lot of different work. I can tell you a bit about that. We're going to go over today just the project in general. We're going to talk about why we're here. What is beach nourishment, a big concern and topic in the region of East Beach. We're going to talk about building resilience to storm on a large scale. And we're also going to talk about building resilience to storm on a small scale. What can you do as a resident? And then last, we'll open it up for discussion. We have the room for about 2 hours. And this presentation is about 30 slides. So it takes about 30, maximum 40 minutes to walk through. But I definitely want to open it up to questions, discussion. We have some boards. We can also walk around the room if we like to hang around as long as we want. Okay. So thank you for being here. The reason we are focusing on barrier beaches, barrier beach management plan, is because barrier beaches are a unique habitat type or unique environment. They respond to the ocean differently than, say, a beach front of a big bluff or bank. Barrier beaches are formed through the lateral transport of sediment. They are, in some sense, ephemeral. They have been built up by ocean processes. They have been washed away through ocean processes. They tend to find a balance with the ocean being made up of unconsolidated sediment. They can be dynamic. They overwash. They erode. They accrete. And all of this is occurring on East Beach. It's occurring at the Knuckle, and it's occurring at Atlantic Ave. Here is just the general morphology of a barrier beach. And this is typical of barrier beaches all over the coast. North Carolina, Outer Banks, up in Essex and Ipswich, we have the Great Marsh Barrier Beaches there. We also have Hull and Winthrop in Massachusetts. There are many barrier beaches all across our Atlantic coastline. And Westport's barrier beach fits that mold perfectly. We have a beach face backed by a dune system, which then grades down into a more quiescent, less wavy area where marshes can start to build habitat. And then we have a bay on the side. So ocean, beach, dune, and bay. It's kind of the sequence of habitats. Since February, we've been doing a lot of groundwork, establishing existing conditions. So you may have seen Southeast Beach grabbing sediment samples, which we tested in the lab, grain size distribution. We were mapping the wetlands, mapping where is the beach face? Where does the beach grade into a dune? When does the dune become the marsh? Look for it. We need to cross the 3 beaches that this project is focused on. We also had a circuit out there, flying a drone to do photography and to take photography and topology. So they did a lot of that circuit as well. We provided really high resolution data on what the beach shape is. All of that went into existing conditions plan sets, which the town can use in the future for understanding what they have and where it is, and what's the shape of it, what's the elevation of it. And then if they were to design any projects that conditions plan set as a really good baseline for that to draw off and make it an engineering design from. We also did a lot of outreach. We have been at Atlantic Ave, we've been at Beach Ave, we've been at East Beach. We've had a few Zooms, but there's a lot more outreach to come. So our process is fairly early. A barrier beach management plan is technically a management document that the town will hold and will be permitted through a notice of intent process through the local conservation commission. So through that process, there are hearings, there is select board hearings, there are conservation commission hearings. So we are getting this information out to you as soon as we can. And there's going to be many more meetings after this discussing the nuts and bolts. Right now, we're going to give a big high-level overview of eSpeech, its vulnerability, its positioning, where it might go in the future, what we can do about it. But the really fine details of each management plan can start to take place throughout the town. We are looking at the near-term, midterm, and the long-term future of eSpeech. So when I say near-term, that's where I'm going to be talking about the day-to-day operations. What does the town do to prepare for the storm? What does the town do to respond to the storm? How can folks who have residences or parcels on eSpeech build up their own resilience, such as with sand fencing or vegetation and normal building, bringing in sediment to build out the beaches a bit wider. That's all kind of the day-to-day near term. And then we're also looking at the viability of mid and long-term management. Can we do anything to improve the resilience of the beach? Make sure that it lasts as long as it can. How much does that cost? Can we afford that? What kind of storm does that buy us protection from? We're going to start to answer some of those questions here today. And then we'll talk about even the longer term. What is happening on the geology scale? Sea level rise and changes in our coastline. What is the general trend? I've said it a couple of times, but here's a map just to look at. The three beaches that are focused in this project are Atlantic Ave, Beach Ave, and eSpeech. The reason it's those three beaches and not Cherry Wet, for instance, or I'm not sure of the name, but the natural public beach to the west of Atlantic Ave, is because these are areas where there's public beach backed by a roadway. So the town essentially has assets that it needs to manage that are vulnerable to erosion. And there have been issues that have occurred already. Storms very recently in 2023, January 2024, and April of 2024. All of these nor'easters and southeasters are hammering the shoreline, and the town is looking at their assets and thinking, how do we manage this? We only have a limited amount of resources. We need to understand what we're up against. So the goal of this project is to understand these barrier beaches and to build the resilience of them. The reason is because we want the barrier beaches to go on doing what they do. They are a buffer to the inland. Barrier beaches are taking the brunt of the storms. As these big southeasters and tropical storms come off the coastline, they're driving large waves and storm surges right at these beaches. And these beaches really have to take a lot. And that's why they are overwashing and eroding. But there's a benefit to that. That's a benefit upstream. When there is a breach in the left, for instance, that can drive storm surge further up the East River, for instance. They also provide essential habitat. Primarily one that was probably on your minds are the shorebirds. We just got to see piping plovers nesting on Elephant Rock Beach the other day, actually. And then thirdly, they support public access and recreation. Why we're all here in the first place. We love them. A little bit about why we're here and what has happened in history. There have been a succession of major storms hitting the southern coast of Massachusetts, including Westport. These photos go from 1938 in the top left, 2023 in the bottom right, just kind of showing that this is an occurrence that is frequent or regular, you could say. Some storms are larger than others, but even a small-scale storm can cause damage. So that's what is shown on this bottom figure here. You can see these peaks and valleys. This is the water surface elevation, the monthly peak, since 1932. There are major peaks in 1938, 1944, 1954. These are the hurricanes in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where water levels from hurricanes and tropical storms reach highs that we have not seen since. Those are major damaging events that you and your parents and their parents might have experienced and seen the damage that can occur at eSpeech. Homes are washed away and not rebuilt. The character of the beach changes. After Hurricane Carol, we had a bit more of a quiet time, comparatively, but there are still peaks all throughout there. About every decade or so, there is a storm or two storms or three storms which hit about 4 feet above NADB. And that is the same as what we saw in the past several years. So January 13th, 2024, December 23rd, 2023, these storms occurred. These the tide gauge at Woods Hole, which represents the South Coast here, at that 45-year return period, 3 times in recent 7 years. So the occurrence of that in recent times is more frequent than so what is this?
We don't. Is all of it. We just need to figure out what.
Alright, you just walk like it's when you turn your back, where I can tell like the audio is not picking it up.
I feel like the camera's less important than the microphone. Could I move the microphone just closer to me?
Sure.
Maybe I mean you're talking. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So my audio is unmuted.
Yeah. And then we'll discuss.
Okay. Thanks, Deb. Feel free to interrupt me.
Okay.
For sure. It's okay. So what is the result of all of these storms? What does that do to our beaches? And the answer is that they tend to erode. These big storms, big waves tend to overwash sediment or pull sediments offshore, replace and create sandbars. And the erosion trends at East Beach are specifically pictured here.
We're better volume. Thank you for
Okay, sure, no problem. This image at the top here is the erosion trend from the year 2000 to 2025. So this is the past 25 years, something that we're probably all relatively seen at East Beach. And I think, I've heard from many of you that you have watched the beach erode right in front of you. These changes are kind of accelerating. And that's what we've seen in our analysis of the shoreline change. So here we have mapped out the high tide line, essentially, over that 25-year period. The darkest blue colors are showing the older years, and the lighter blue colors are showing the younger years. And you can see that the rate of erosion is between about 1 foot, 2 feet, nearing up to 3 feet of erosion. The greatest, most erosive areas are to the west, where the red is the darkest on those transects. The yellow areas are where it's a bit more stable, and then there's a bit more stability over the east by Horse area.
Sorry, am I reading that right? That's feet per year?
Feet per year. Yes.
So 2 feet per year times 25 years is 50 feet.
50 feet of inch loss. Since the year 2000, there's been about 50 feet of loss. I think that's about right.
So that's just a mathematical average.
Yes. Yes.
Over the last 20 years.
Yeah. It's a linear regression. So there's some it's essentially an average.
It doesn't show the rate of change, which is what I'm getting to.
Oh,
Whether it's accelerating or decelerating.
Oh no, yeah, we don't have that yet. It's a linear line. Tony.
So this analysis of this in the past, you look at what's going on with the shoreline trends.
Yeah.
Starting from the 1895 line all the way through. What we had found, this was also using the shoreline data, the seabed data, that the shoreline basically was in equilibrium or treating in the past with the early surveys.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a kind of like about 100-foot-ish of retreat that occurred in the 1930s all the way to the 70s.
Okay.
That time frame.
Yeah.
And then it appears to, based on the transects we looked at, reach a new equilibrium.
Okay.
During the area where it was heavily up.
Okay.
And that was the shoreline transect view that we have and look at several different things. Yeah,
Okay. So you said you were living in an area that was relatively cobbled, is that what you said, or?
correct.
Okay.
It had become relatively common.
Yes.
And the recent people living, we saw year over year, there are cases where it accretes, and there's cases where it retreats, and it's kind of awesome.
It definitely
That's what we saw.
Yeah.
We did not see, like, in a more recent, probably like a monolithic trend of retreat.
Okay.
Per year.
Okay. What have you seen on the ground? I feel like on the ground that the experience has been that there's been a general trend for erosion.
I would say measuring from the road to the ocean, like my property is roughly about the same. And some years we actually get more sand. So for instance, after the December 22 and 23 storms, there was a lot of overwash, a lot of cobble on the road. Town basically took that cobble away. But we saw sand come in the creek, and we ended up over time there was actually more sand on the beach now than there was before. So like even recently we're walking down an area that had always been historically cobbled.
Yeah.
And there's sand there.
Yeah.
Part of it is when you get those large energy events, sand that's stored in the bottom of the ocean and washed out gets moved, gets transported, so much weight in it. And that's an effect that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of that could be fine. Oh, your question?
And just to element of Tony said, I was very involved in that analysis.
Okay.
And what we found in this
1844
survey.
Yeah.
And what we found is that from 1844 to 1934, we have that East Beach accreted. It was growing. That area might have grown anywhere from 30 to 50 feet. It was fairly linear.
Yeah.
And then all the surveys after that showed a rapid retreat to the equilibrium that was established in 1994. There were lots of curious as to why some of the state is not bifurcated.
Yeah.
A little bit more instead of just taking and
Yeah, I hear you. So I think what you might be alluding to is that in the 30s and 40s was the construction of the causeway and a potential change in the beach dynamic. So we have this, torrential excretion and then torrential erosions. I can't honestly speak to the impact of the causeway. That is really the Buzzards Bay Coalition study, but I did read it and I can say a few things. So,
no, I don't want to write about the study.
Okay.
But what's frustrating for us is that you're taking a linear view
yeah,
at data that is not linear.
we can map out just what this looks like over time. We could do instead of just have a blanket, we could have a trend where we put the years all the way along the bottom of the chart. What is the trend? How is the change?
We've done that.
Yeah, we can do that.
And show strong correlation.
Okay.
With the installation of Cosworth, which is a different
Right,
issue.
right.
But I find it a little frustrating that we're still not showing this over time. We're trying to do 2 points.
Yeah.
From beginning to end, when in fact, through the end treated,
I hear you.
which presents a totally different story.
Yeah, this isn't just a where is it today, where was it in 1895? Divide that by whatever many years has gone in between. There is a best fit curve to that, but I do get what you're saying. You want to see what is the fluctuation of time. What about those oscillations? That's what I'm
Yes,
talking about.
you look at the Albright study, 1997.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
At that point, they took 2 points,
Okay.
1844 to 1994, through a straight line, and they projected that it would continue,
Mhm.
and they were wrong.
Okay.
It did without new equilibrium.
Okay.
So we just want to make sure we're not going to do the same thing here.
This is really just to give us context. Yeah, this is not defining the future. And I think, one thing that Tony brought up is areas that have become more cobble became more stable. And that's because cobble is heavier and it just tends to hold its position. So that, that does add up. And we can kind of see that a little bit here, although these erosion rates might be higher than you might be expecting. But the lighter orange color of the White Horse Neck Road is where the cobble is pretty much just pure cobble. And so there's a little bit less erosion there, whereas we look to the far west area where the sandy area is more easily eroded. Another area that's a bit more stable is just west of the outcrop. Is there a name for that rock, by the way? That just sits at the edge of the property is there? What is it?
Well, Reese Rock,
Crease?
Reese.
Crease. Okay. Yeah, so just west of that rock is kind of acting like a groin or like a jetty. It kind of blocks the sediment transport because the sediment wants to move from the west to the east. That's just the general circulation dynamic. You know, if your kids are jumping in the ocean and watch them ride the longshore current, they're probably moving from the west to the east. And that's the way the sand is transporting this day to day. But just upstream, just west of that rock, East Rock, there's a little bit more stability, kind of pull some sand.
What was that time period that you said in recent times when you lost 50 feet of beach frontage?
And from about year 2000 to 2025. So we used some of the CZM data going back to 1895. And then we also added 2023 and 2025.
Okay, so those of us that are living there, that witnessed the amount of material that disappeared
Yeah,
in 23, 24 storms, which created most of that 50 feet that you're referring to. That material, in the definition of what a barrier beach does, where sand and cobble not so much, but moves linear, pushes back. Where did that go if it pushed back?
sorry, can you say?
The cobble pushed back.
Yeah,
Why it went on the road?
okay.
It didn't go back to where it came from.
Yeah.
And, we keep coming back to the same point.
Uh-huh.
You're telling me we lost that much material from 2000 to 2025.
Yeah,
I can show you videos and evidence of where that material went, why it didn't go back to where it came from, which is what the Massachusetts law states it should be.
Yeah.
So, the goal here is to figure out how we're going to protect that barrier beach and that road going forward.
Yeah.
I have to keep coming back to that because you're using all this data and all this stuff going back 150 years. So 3 storms in 2 months for a lot of that material to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we going to do to protect the beach? Because there's another storm coming.
yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin. And absolutely, material on these barrier beaches should not be taken off site. And that's part of the barrier beach management plan. So when I say we're looking at near term, mid-term, long-term, these near-term day-to-day practices that we're going to define this barrier beach management plan that will be presented to all of you, presented to the select board, that's going to include recommendations to the town of what to do with their sediment. And one of those priority recommendations is keep the sand in the system. Don't pick it up and bring it off-site, bring it inland, bring it to other beaches that might also learn it. So, yeah, I get it. Right, so all of our kind of background literature review, the Aubrey study, the Great Coalition study, the historic area studies, the on-the-ground site analyses, that's all kind of trying to understand where we are. And then we want to ask, what comes next for these beaches? How can we better manage these resources? Because they are kind of ephemeral. They're kind of slipping through our fingers. We need to know what to do best because we're in a stressed situation here where the beaches are eroding and these places are loved and used, and we want to maintain them for as long as we can. So we want to respond appropriately. We want to respond appropriately now, and we want to make plans for the future to respond appropriately. In order to understand how to respond, we want to, just define a little bit more about these beaches. So East Beach is a natural shoreline. There are not coastal armoring structures. There's no seawalls. There's no revetments. There's no groins, jetties, breakwaters, all of these things that might be in a more developed area in downtown Boston, for instance. This is a natural shoreline. And what it wants to do is respond naturally to the dynamic ocean environment. A big storm comes, it washes that material over the road, washes it into the inland parcels, but it is balancing itself with that ocean. So rather than building a seawall and holding the line, this area is dynamic. So what do we need to do? We need to lean into the dynamic nature of a natural shoreline. essentially using natural materials such as sand, gravel, cobble, things that we see out there, building dunes, planting vegetation, using sand fencing to hold that vegetation in place so that vegetation can grow more easily. We want to look into materials that will match the existing environment and build resilience at the same time, build habitat, build recreation. So I keep referencing beach and dune nourishment. And essentially, what is that? It is the trucking in or pumping in through dredging of compatible sediment to increase the volume of a beach or dune. This is done up and down the Atlantic coast, up and down the West Coast, on the Gulf as well. It's very common practice. The Army Corps engages in it. State of Massachusetts engages in it. But it is a costly approach as well. So where does the sand come from? It's a hard thing to answer. How do we get it there? Trucks, and dredges, and pipe it. What kind of wave energies are we facing? We need to build big nourishment projects. Do we need small nourishment projects? Although it is just a mound of sand at the end of the day, there is surprisingly a lot of engineering that can go into it. But essentially, what East Beach is lacking is sediment. That Buzzards Bay Coalition study identified that offshore sediment sources are dwindling. Sea level rise is starting to raise the wave outside of the zone of influence of that sediment that is offshore. So Tony was getting at the big storms, we can stir up the sediment off the offshore and wash it inland. But with sea level rise, that sediment is becoming less and less accessible. And it's also just dwindling in general. It is a limited resource. There is not infinite sand offshore. So East Beach is sediment starved, and so it needs sediment. But beach nourishment, putting a disclaimer on it, is in nature a sacrificial strategy. So beaches are dynamic, beaches erode. If you put a big headland of sand in the ocean, the waves are going to focus and they're going to attack that. And they're going to spread it all along the beach. That doesn't mean it's not doing its job. That just means it's finding its equilibrium with the ocean. So whenever a project goes in, a beach nourishment project, your beach would look really large and wide immediately. And then one storm later, it'll be completely different. 5 years later, it'll look about what it used to look, except you may have gained maybe 10 feet, 20 feet of beach width. So it is necessarily and in nature a sacrificial strategy, but it is a way to protect more valuable inland properties and habitats with natural materials. So many communities do consider nourishment, and they do it primarily for the reason that I just said, which is they are sediment starved. Many coastlines are armored right now, so seawalls or revetments are kind of blocking the sediments of the banks and the bluffs or the dunes, and sediment is not getting to many coastlines along the Massachusetts shoreline. There are also dams upstream in the rivers that are reducing the amount of sediment coming down river systems. And then, like I said, offshore sediment supplies are not unlimited resources, and they're being drowned out by sea level rise. So there are many pieces going into this kind of sediment budget, how much sand is available to East Beach, and the budget there is in the deficit. So that is why beaches tend to consider beach nourishment. Without a beach nourishment source, or without a beach nourishment project, East Beach will respond to the waves in each storm and incremental sea level rise by migrating inland and upland in response. So each concurrent storm will overwash, and the barrier will start to fold over itself in time. And so you might be seeing that on some of the inland properties, overwash material might be washing into those parcels and building up the elevation there, while the elevation of the beach is either dropping or moving inland. So in a nourishment project, there are many appropriate sources of sand, and there are many inappropriate sources of sand. Right? One inappropriate source of sand is harvesting from another area of the beach. Now, the whole East Beach barrier system and Westport's regional system as a whole is dynamic and working on a large scale. There are large scale ocean currents. These storms far exceed the scale of the town itself. And so pulling sand, for instance, from the east side of East Beach to place it on the west side of East Beach is only going to leave one area at greater risk while another area benefits. So really, ideally, sediment would be taken from an inland source, like a mine or something like that, a sediment line, and it could be trucked in. Another potential source is through dredging and dredging of offshore sand resources. The state of Massachusetts has identified pockets of offshore sand resources, but those are very hard to get to, and they demand a regional scale project, something that has not yet occurred in the state of Massachusetts, to dredge offshore and pump onshore to the beaches. One other thing to say is that material that's placed on the beaches must be compatible. So East Beach has a wide range of grain sizes. There's kind of fine sand, medium, coarse sand. There's a significant amount of gravel, shells, and then especially on the eastern side by Horseneck Road, a lot of cobble. So depending on, if you're looking to do a project on your parcel, you might look at your sand and you might try to find something that's matching. This likely means not going to Home Depot to get a bag of sand. It means finding an inland source like a gravel pit or sand and gravel pit or something like that, and working with Chris Capone of Concom to identify a matching grain size that can match your beach.
So is the fact that Westport borders a different state, is that causing issues with this? Is Rhode Island doing anything on their side that you guys could integrate with?
Yeah, great question.
Because it sounds like the cost benefit won't be there if it's just one little corner in Massachusetts. There's nothing to the west.
A large scale for what I think you're referencing is kind of the offshore dredging opportunity.
Right, because you mentioned that.
Yeah, there's offshore sand resources. I mean, getting Rhode Island involved could improve the cost benefit of that. Yeah,
But they're not right now.
not that I know, but that's not really
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
If anyone would be aware, it'd probably be you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Connor.
What's that? Okay, yes.
So your bullet point number 2 there.
Yeah.
Not by mass law, you can't take sand carbon from existing buildings to pilot building areas. And you comment that you could take material from one part of East Beach to reinforce another part of East Beach. Is that correct?
Well, then you should.
So moving back to what I said earlier,
Yeah.
that material, which is in the Mass General Law, should go right back to where it came from. My question becomes, because that south side of the beach is all private property, how do we work with the town to ensure that when that material, when we do get an event, that stuff gets put back exactly where it came from, within reason? Push south, because if it's not pushed south, where it came from, which is a wording in Mass General Law, and it's moved to another spot, you're breaking the law. And we need some vehicle in place, whether it's a personal agreement between each landowner and the town, so the town, I was down there standing in front of the highway department's pocket loader. They were promising me the work, and they didn't take that material and put it back. And one of the excuses was it's private property and we don't have permission. So is that a gray area that we need to tackle? Because obviously, I could stand there with, excuse the expression, onto the hill, and all I'm going to do is get hauled away, because they're going to do what they want anyway. So how do we get you, the state, involved to ensure that this doesn't happen? Everybody on the south side of that beach, Barrier Beach, has an order of condition. We work and cooperate with conservation and Chris Capone. Everyone takes material to him who can afford to, and it's approved. So only so many people can do it. If you look along that beach, you'll see where some people have, many people can't. So how do we overcome that barrier? Because we need a uniform nourishment in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, sir. Yeah. Try to respond to, you said many things there that I think are important. One is that I agree with you, material should not be taken off the beach. And that's part of the beach management plan. Don't take the sand that overwashes onto the road and take it off inland or to some other place. Keep it in the system. But to the kind of the nuances of what is law and what is not law, honestly, I can't speak exactly to that. So I don't want to, be up here saying that the town is doing one thing and the people are doing another and people are great. It's not about the laws, but it is about what's right for the beach. And getting the sand back to where it came from is not exactly the best thing for the beach. The beach is trying to migrate inland in response to sea level rise. If we walked away from East Beach, not saying that we will, but if we walked away from East Beach, that barrier beach would stay there for probably in perpetuity. It would just slowly move and oscillate and be moving inland. Maybe a big storm would come and wash it 100 feet inland, but it would still be there. So if we let the sediment just respond naturally, this place will be resilient and it will stick. If we try to pick up, a dump truck full of sand and we put it here in front of our property there and build a little headland, and then build, 100 feet down the beach, we build another little headland. We're kind of creating this incongruous armoring approach that's not as effective as what you said is a large scale beach management project. When you put little headlands out there, they become a focus for wave energy. They immediately start to erode and dissipate. So, maybe to the benefit of your neighbors, which they might thank you for, but that one project is not going to hold. It's kind of like, when you try to protect your sandcastle against the rising tide, it's always washing away. So what East Beach does need, if it's going to try to maintain its status quo as long as possible, is a large scale project. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. What does it take to do that? Hopefully that's something for you. You already got my point about overwash, so thank you. But essentially, sometimes overwash gets onto the beach and it needs to be managed. And this beach management plan is going to have detailed information about what to do with it. Now, there's an interim policy in town to spread the material that's north of the road to the north side of the road, or south of the road to the south side of the road. And that's about, I think, a fairly fair approach. This material is trying to move inland. It can't stay on the road. We need to get the cars through. It's trying to migrate, but, we also want to respect the fact that the sand came from people's properties. And so splitting that down the middle of the center lines is on the table. It's a interim policy today.
Ron?
Oh, thanks.
I think that the current plan is and space that the material came from the ocean side, and then we put that in the setback of the ocean side.
Oh, yeah.
I think we've come back, let's come back to.
Yeah, I'll come back to this.
Of beach management plan, because I think it's good for you to get to the alternatives.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I think I have to share about that. This is a bit about what I was, waving my hand with here, like a crazy person talking about, is where is the sand going and what is, our response to that? So if we look at the pre-storm beach, that's the top row here. We have a layer of sediment that is yellow here that's highlighted because that's just the sediment that might get mobilized in a storm event. So the storm comes and the red arrow, you can see the waves are pushing sand inland, and the waves as they pull back are also pulling sand offshore. That sediment continues to push inland and it starts to overwash on the roadway. You can see the yellow start to pile up on that roadway. And it also starts to build up a sandbar offshore. And then the response to that can sometimes be to plow the roadway, clear it, and to build large headlands in front of properties there. And that creates an uneven redistribution of sediment. You can see that the bottom profile is not equivalent to the top profile. So what we're seeing is that the bottom profile is in disequilibrium with the ocean. So the ocean is going to focus its wave energy on these headlands that are created, on these steep beaches. It's going to try to flatten them. It's going to spread that material. It's going to pull it offshore. It's going to increase actually the amount of erosion that occurs. All right, so to Kevin's point, large scale nourishment project, sediment starved beach, bringing in a large amount of sediment. What does that look like? Can it improve our position? So we looked at 3 different types of design for East Beach. We also looked at places at Atlantic Ave and Beach Ave. That's for another meeting. We looked at a large-scale beach nourishment project. It's a little bit off the screen here. We also looked at a large-scale beach and dune restoration project. And we also looked at the cobble nourishment project that's specifically thinking of the eastern reaches of the beaches. We're trying to reduce wave energy, reduce overtopping, support habitat, and keep this barrier beach functioning as it should. So here's a bit zoomed in figure of that. Essentially, it just means bringing in compatible sediment to widen the dry beach and the subtidal beach. And in the second figure here, you can see there's a dune built up. At this scale, it's about 3 feet above the existing grade. And then the cobble project as well, that's shown at the bottom. Again, expanding out that high tide beach and importing sediment that goes all the way into the intertidal zone. So I want to talk about how the beach responds to a storm. We've talked about kind of the 5-year storm, which we saw in 2024, the 100-year storm, those hurricanes that we've seen decades ago. This model is showing a 10-year storm. This is about once every 10 years, something that we can expect to occur in the coming decade. And a 10-year storm on East Beach shows that significant damage can occur. And that makes sense. That's what we have seen in East Beach. We have seen the roadway start to undermine. We have seen the road have to be retreated inland, just a bit further east. And so this image here is showing the initial profile. That's that solid gray line. You can see the red area. That's where the beach is today. And a 10-year storm washes away all of that red and deposits it in the near shore and on the back side of the barrier in the areas of green. So red is erosion and green is accretion. Essentially what this figure is telling us is that a 10-year storm has the potential to undermine East Beach Road. That also means it would undermine the properties that are seaward of East Beach Road. Now, if we built a beach nourishment project, would that provide us any buffer to that storm? Beaches tend to break the waves offshore. So could that provide the buffer that we need? So this image here is showing if a large-scale beach nourishment project were constructed, how would that respond to a 10-year storm? And what we found in the 10-year storm is that beach nourishment, it's at an unnatural slope, it's at an unnatural width. It would immediately start to erode and shift and spread. But the dunes that exist there today would also still be expected to erode. So a 10-year storm is a pretty large event. It sits around for a while. Those waves can slowly eat away at your nourishment and reach the dunes and overwash the dunes. So in this image, we were showing that the roadway is at risk. We're talking on a scale of a half a foot here. So the scale of the model or the accuracy of the model, it's close to saying essentially the roadway could be damaged in this scenario. And sediment would be expected to wash offshore and wash into the back barrier. And then the third scenario is a beach and dune nourishment project. So you can see, I'll toggle through left to right. This is the existing beach. This is with the beach nourishment. And this is with the beach and dune restoration. So you can see now that the beach comes up to a higher peak. It's a bit wider. There's more volume in sand. Now, how does this respond to a 10-year storm? We still have that erosion of that beach nourishment profile. And there is, unfortunately, still erosion of that dune that we built. But no longer is there undermining of the roadway, and the parcels seaward maintain their general footprint. So there is some lowering of the elevation of the barrier with accretion on the backside and accretion on the toe again. But in general, the barrier is a bit better protected. So a beach and dune restoration project could protect the roadway, but there would be checkpoints. Go ahead, Thomas.
No
Sure.
slide to go. Right? The storm radar sheet. It's a little different than the picture I have. In the picture I have on the slide, it shows basically like the entire beach is underneath mean high water.
Oh, that means that was a draft slide. We had to the mean high water is actually just rock, marked rock.
Got it.
The mean high water should be at about 2 feet, 2.5 feet. Yeah, about 2 feet. NABD. I think yours shows the mean high water at 5 feet. That's just not true.
So this is
Oh,
right.
yeah,
This is right.
Right,
That's unfortunately wrong.
okay.
good catch though.
That was, yeah. You're a student.
That's for all three.
No, all of these slides, they all have the mean high water. So you can see the blue lines here. I'm sorry, you can describe them. That's just showing the time. So the high tide, the low tide is between these two lines here.
What, do you know what the height above mean high tide is from an engineering perspective, minimum height
Okay.
that a roadway has to be above mean high tide? There's gotta be some kind of standard or figure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
One of those has the road, if it were rebuilt, would be basically right at the high tide, almost at the high tide mark. A foot. So I was curious,
Yeah.
what is the minimum, if there is a minimum?
Yeah, I don't think that there is a state standard. We have a lot of historic roads in Massachusetts that just run all over the place. And some run on essentially what used to be marsh, and some run along what used to be a beach. And yeah, we have roads that flood today on the Cape, essentially, for example, that floods almost daily because of high tide. So, yeah. All right. So, what I wanted to kind of get at there is that a beach and dune nourishment project can be a buffer to storms, but it's not a perfect buffer. It does wash away. It needs to be rebuilt over time. So you can stand up to a 10-year storm, but that means 10 years later, you're going to need to rebuild it again if you want to try to maintain where you are. Combine that with sea level rise, and the frequency of rebuilding is going to have to increase. So some stark realities of a beach nourishment project is, one, they are very expensive. This is large volumes of imported sediment. In this example, it's about 200,000 cubic yards of sediment. 200,000 cubic yards is about 10,000 dump trucks sand placed on the beach. And if those 10,000 dump trucks of sand are placed on the beach, a few caveats are: one, easements would be necessary if public funding is used to construct that. So that means easements for public access laterally along the beach. So the state does not typically fund a beach nourishment project along private parcels unless there's a public benefit. That public benefit would then have to come through the easements. And I can talk more about that if you have questions. They are also time consuming to fund and permit. So they are difficult to find funding for. They're expensive, as I'll talk about in a second. It would take several years to identify that source and to make it happen. That's why we have the Barrier Beach Management Plan, looking at the day-to-day. Well, something like this could kick off in the future if you all got that going. All right, and then these are temporary measures. So a project that is constructed is not going to last forever. It could last 1 year, it could last 10 years, but eventually it would need to be rebuilt. So what is the cost of those projects? These are the three alternatives here: a beach nourishment project, a beach and dune nourishment project, and a cobble burn project. They're on different scales for alternatives 1 and 2, this blue line marking essentially where the private properties are, up to Pete's Rock, is where a large scale sediment nourishment project, which is mostly sand, could be built. And a project on that scale, 10,000 dump trucks worth, would cost about $13.7 million. If you built a dune on top of that, that's another $2 million, so $15.7 million. If you did a cobble nourishment project where it's feasible in the area of Horse Neck Road, where cobble is the dominant sediment, you could build a project on a smaller scale to smaller reach. Cobble is also coarser, so it stands up to waves a little bit better. You don't need as much material. You can build a project along that reach for about $1.7 million. And these are all just for construction, labor, equipment, and materials. This doesn't include the engineering, permitting, the post-construction monitoring, et cetera, and the maintenance. Yeah, please.
So on the dune restoration, that involves probably planting grasses
Yes.
to hold the sand in place,
It
right?
does, yeah.
How effective is that for the additional cost of that cost? So that's about 15% or so, maybe or less than that.
Yeah.
Would that give better than the 15% benefit
Yeah, good question.
to the erosion, not to the use of the property?
Yeah,
It's
I
not
hear
your
you.
grass you can't walk on or use. So
Yeah, I hear you. boy, so that's tough to try to equate the performance to the cost. Exactly. Most of that cost is coming from the extra sand that's needed to get a little bit higher. No, most of that cost is actually in sand.
Okay.
But planting is costly. On the scale of this project, it would be hundreds of thousands to plant that whole lane every foot.
So it sounds like it would be pretty effective.
It would be pretty
For the
effective.
cost
But
of
it would
using
be,
grass.
I think it'd be pretty effective if it's not hit by an immediate storm.
Right, right.
That's the thing. You know, roots
Like any
take a
plant.
year, take 2 years, or like you would give them a chance to thrive before it folds.
The question for alternatives going to what type of material would you estimate? Was it like sand and couple mix or?
Yeah, good question. I can get you the specifics. When you check, there's a median grain size diameter that we use based on the samples that we took. Boy, it's something in the range of. I'm not sure. Of course, sand. Of course, sand. So it's not gravel. It was sand. But of course, it's sand. All right. I want to talk about the Salisbury project that was built a year ago in North Shore of Massachusetts. I don't know. Does anybody here who heard this example? You were in the news. It's just kind of, it was a hot topic and a good representation of what nourishment is and what nourishment isn't. So many residents got together across about 25 different homes. They put their money together. They built a dune in front of their homes at this very narrow beach right on the edge of the ocean. It cost them about $600,000. It was 15,000 tons of sand, and they built it in the spring. After they built that project, about 2 days later, a large-scale storm came, a nor'easter, and it washed away half of the sand. It washed it not necessarily all out to the ocean or upstream or downstream, but it essentially eroded what they had just built. And the result of that was headlines saying, coastal town, private homeowners build dune, and it washes away. And so that it was, fairly negatively portrayed project. But at the same time, the homeowners themselves said the dunes did their job. They protected some of the properties from that storm. That was the storm. Who knows when that storm was going to come, but that was the storm they were trying to protect themselves from. And it did its job. It buffered them. They didn't lose their homes, but they lost half of their project. That system wasn't off. That sand wasn't lost from the system. It then filled in the beach area, and now they have a bit of a wider beach as a result. So it can buy time, but it is not a fix all. I'm going way over time, aren't I? Yeah, thanks. But these questions are also so great. Does anybody have to go at a certain time? Or are you're all pretty good? What's that? You're good. I really appreciate your patience.
Yes, that. You go to pizza.
Yeah, that's not a good idea. Maybe next time. All right. One thing you all might be thinking about is why aren't we doing seawalls for groins for breakwaters? I talked about the natural shoreline of East Beach, but a seawall would be a way that people might, try to hold the line and plant their flag and say, this is where I want to stay for the rest of the time. But hard armoring, in its intention, is to disrupt the natural sediment transport of a beach. So it tries to hold the sand, anything inland, right where it is. And that is to the detriment of anything on the seaward side. So if a seawall were built all along East Beach, for instance, that beach with any sort of dry beach that's there today would then be essentially just abandoned. And thought, okay, well, that's gone. We're holding everything inland of the seawall. And the waves would quickly erode that sediment, and we'd be left with the seawall on the ocean. And the result of that is actually costly. So it's not a one-time fix. Building a seawall where the beach then erodes, because then waves can start to hit that seawall more aggressively. Now there's no beach to buffer. So the seawall is taking all of the energy of the storm, and it starts to crack and it starts to undermine. And there are places like Marshfield where they have a seawall on a barrier beach, and they're still doing nourishment to protect their seawall. And then they're rebuilding their seawall to protect their homes. And it's really an endless cycle of damage and repair. All right, one of the last things, and I'm going to hand to just Steve, who can just lay out essentially the plan for the project in the next, the plan forward for the town. I did want to talk about the long-term view. This might be might not be new to you because this is all from the 2021 East Beach Corridor study. There was reference to planning for long-term retreat and relocation. That's because East Beach is on an erosive trend. We can talk about what that trend exactly is, and I understand, where your ground of experience comes from. But there is a trend of erosion. There is a lack of sediment in the system. Sea level rise is only going in one direction. So this beach is wanting to move inland and erode and overwash. So the maintenance of East Beach Road needs to be improved. There need to be practices that manage that asset best. And Christine can talk to that a bit. But we also need to start to build a vision as to what East Beach could look like. What does retreat mean? We need to identify objective and mutually agreed upon thresholds for monitoring and action. When do we take action towards retreat? When does the town, I don't know. When does the town no longer invest in the roadway itself? And then plan for voluntary acquisition of East Beach parcels. So, some people might look at their parcel and think this is untenable. I can't keep this up. Is there a way that they could be bought out before it's too late?
Absolutely. Question. Your headline, subheading, we want 40 this speech for the study.
Yes.
Are you saying that these 4 items are your conclusion for a town beach management plan, or saying these are conclusions from the vulnerability study?
These are conclusions from that vulnerability study. So these are this is essentially information reiterated from that.
Yeah. I mean, a bunch of us who are on that study.
Yeah.
And just in my view, those aren't the conclusions from the study.
These
are things that were evaluated.
Yeah.
And there were other items that were evaluated. In fact, in the study, it's a whole list of recommendations, timelines, and so on.
Yeah.
But I would disagree that this is the characterization of that study's summary.
Okay.
I don't think
That's very good. Yeah. No, that's not what you're right. That's not what I was attempting to get across here. Hey, this 2021 study said that he's doing. I just want to say we didn't do any independent analysis around retreat. We are only reflecting a few of the essentially one chapter in that book. Thanks.
Yes. So I make honor to the most fun part of the conversation, right? It's hard to stand up. I mean, we, as part of our work, want to find really positive things to tell you, and sometimes it's work that is challenging. But I do want to start my part of this talk. I don't have 2 or 3 slides, don't worry. But it's just the reason that we're here is because of all of you. So I think it's important to note, we talk about coastal resiliency a lot, the resiliency of properties, but social resiliency is also another thing. So the fact that all of you are here, you're engaged with the process, you're getting in touch with the town is engaged, they're going after grant funding, all of these things are really positive. So I'm trying to start with a positive note, but what's been a little challenging about this study is that there's 2 major components to it. So the vulnerability assessment and alternatives analysis, which Connor was just running through, we can talk about that more. All of that's bucketed under the Barrier Beach Management Plan study. The Barrier Beach Management Plan is a little different. So it's a planning document which looks at the day-to-day practices and how they can be improved to comply with local, state, and federal regulations. This process evolves and has evolved in these early stages, just a lot of meetings and a lot of talk. How have things been done in the past? What municipal departments are responsible for what? What beaches have what resources? Okay. And part of it's just, this process has been just about talking to you all about how barrier beaches work, engaging in that conversation. So one thing that we want to look at is that the Barrier Beach Management Plan is looking at how we manage individual resources and how we do certain practices. So there's detailed guidance that will be coming in the Barrier Beach Management Plan. Part of that is for you all. Hey, I learned about dune grass in Connor's presentation. I want to help put some dune grass on my property. What should I do? Well, the Barrier Beach Management Plan will detail how to do certain activities underneath the Wetlands Protection Act. And that's how they should be done, especially in places where we have rare species, which East Beach does. It will look at activities such as sand fencing. Sand fencing is a great example because it runs, you'll see some places, they just have it running straight against the toe of the dune, right? Actually, not your best way to put sand fencing. It's better if it's in a zigzag pattern. But there needs to be some guidance on that. Not only that, but Kevin has mentioned a few times through this presentation about the overwash material. So as a part of our conversation, part of my role in this process was to look at what's permitted currently underneath the town. What does that intermittent order look at? And then if we look at how this Barrier Beach is evolving, what are best practices? So the plan that I'm working on separately, and at the same time in tandem, but separately, is looking at how do we detail those practices. Not only so you all have clarity on how a practice should be done, but also so that we talk with each individual department about how that practice should be done. And it's in writing with, my job's really fun. I got to be like, you can only use this type of back order. You can only go this distance within the sand. You can only do it this time of year. You need to call this person if you want to do it. So policing, I think what we've heard throughout this whole process is that you all want more guardrails around how an activity takes place. And the Barrier Beach Management Plan is creating more transparency about how, why, who will do the effort, and what that will look like. Not just like you feel like someone decided to go down and do it a certain way. It will be line by line exactly how every single action should take place. So we have been working on our end to start to have those conversations, to detail, to create a draft. Our next phase of this project will be bringing that draft with you and talking about it. Nothing's set in stone. Nothing's already been permitted. Nothing's being thrust upon you. We want to talk with you about, now that you have time to draft those actions, what do they look like and what your feedback is. So that's the next phase of the project. So we're kind of here with like two buckets. One is we're happy to talk more about, the components of nourishment, the alternatives assessment, but we are also here to talk about the Barrier Beach Management Plan, which we feel sets the public guidance to improve day-to-day practices and improve with damage and response practices. So we feel like this is a two-track strategy which means Westport Barrier Beaches are protected now while we explore other options in the future. So I would say Connor in part can answer a lot of questions about if we are able to do nourishment, if we're able to do a large project, what does that look like, and how does that happen? But in the meantime, while you explore those options, we also want to have a plan in place that says, hey, when the storm comes this winter, what do we do with the material? Let's make sure that it's redistributed the way it's supposed to be. Hey, I want to put something on my property. How can I be helpful in part of doing it as well? So there's a lot to this project, but I think what I want to reiterate is we're at the early phases with this part of the project, and the next phase is connecting with all of you about that guidance and the details. And some nice things about the Barrier Beach Management Plan is it will have sediment-sized grain curves. So if you want to go talk to Chris about putting sediment on your property, you've already established what the grain-sized curves are. We have that. You can access that in the report. We have wetland resource area delineations, which show which resource types are where. We have existing conditions plans, which have a set elevation to what the dune topography looks like today. And then as a part of that planning process, we can also put recommendations in about plans for the future, like explore long-term, large-scale beach nourishment. Those would be things that are in the recommendation, but we do need to talk about some of the day-to-day practices and make sure that there's more guidance on how those are done. So I think the next part of the process is just, we're happy to talk to you about either bucket. Just a quick plug there's this website called MyCoast. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it before. MyCoast is a great platform that runs out of coastal zone management, which enables you to upload photos. And if anyone has questions, I can stay with you and help you upload them. It's a great resource to highlight repetitive damage, and it kind of shows hot spots along the coast. So you can document storm events, high tide flooding events, damage. This is a great resource to be able to document some of the things that are happening. And then individuals like us tend to look at those sites and see how we can try to help. Questions? Yeah.
I thank you very much. This is really helpful. My name is John Bullard. I'm on the planning board and I chair the climate resilience committee. And my wife and I live off of Karen Webb land. So we have not just I'm not just looking at this as I'm on the planning board, but hey, this is my neighborhood too. In a year-round house, but it's our major custom. I guess I love the last slide or so about things like sand fencing and planting, because those are things that, like Baker's Beach does that every winter, and it works. And maybe there's suggestions on improvements about don't do straight lines, do curve, all of that. But you know, it is something that's within the realm that we can do, right? Whereas you look at beach nourishment for East Beach, 13 million or 15 million, whatever it was, that's a lot of money. And my question is, because I think you said, Connor, that you can't, if you just nourish a headland, you know, one piece of property, the next storm, it's going to go to the neighbors, and it's really not helpful to just do it at that small scale. And so I'm thinking, what is the right scale? Because your study area has an area to the east, which is East Beach, and an area to the west, which is the Noble and Atlantic. And there's a big piece in the middle that somehow or other gets ignored. And that's where Mike lives, and I live, and other people live, Trip Boatyard. And I don't know whether it's, you know, the road is either John Reed Road or Cherry and Webb. But it would seem if we're going to do beach nourishment, there was one question, can we get Rhode Island involved? I mean, I don't know what the right scale is, but when you look at $13 million, I'm thinking, well, that's just East Beach. That's not the Noble. That's not Atlantic Avenue. And I don't want to anticipate what your recommendations are, but it would seem, if I were to guess, you know, if these are all barrier beaches, beach nourishment might be a recommended action in those places too. And it probably isn't a lot cheaper to do it in the western part of Westport than the eastern part of Westport. I don't know what the trucking costs are. But I think it's a shame that you left out the middle section, because in the middle of the middle section is Horseneck Beach, which is, I believe, owned by the state. And a lot of the money that might ever make this possible would come from the state. And so their asset, Horseneck Beach, is not included. And DCR, in their infinite wisdom, Chris knows this, you know, went and destroyed a huge section of dunes, which I don't think is best management practices, so they could have a 40-foot wide emergency road, which boggles my mind why the state would do something like that. So they're maybe guilty of the most egregious harm to our system of beaches and dunes around, and yet they're not in the study area. They're not there to be educated, and you never know centralized. And so I don't know, it's too late to change the study parameters and stuff like that. But I guess my quick question is, if beach nourishment is the thing, is the scale, you would do all the beaches in Westport and see how you finance that, or is the scale like the Nubble or East Beach, you know, what's the right scale?
That's a part of it. Yeah. So I think in part, the study was looking at the ocean-facing portions of barrier beaches fronting public roads. We're going to answer both of your questions in multiple ways, but from my perspective, the beach management plan portion is looking at how to manage mostly the ocean-facing portion of the roadway, which is why Charing Web wasn't included. However, I should say, and anything that's applicable in this barrier beach management plan in terms of best practices is something that can get carried through to Charing Web. So anything in terms of like, this is how you should be operating machinery on the beach, or this is how you should be rebuilding a dune in terms of its elevation. All of those things are part of the conversation that's getting established. And I would assume that it will get carried through in terms of its management of that resource. The nourishment question, I'll leave to him. But I will say that conversation about Charing Web has popped up multiple times. And I think it's in our conversations in terms of where does the barrier beach management plan go as it evolves into the future? Because we've talked about, should it be included in the resources and that way in the barrier beach management plan. So we told your feedback has been mentioned before and we appreciate it.
Yeah, great. And great question on the beach nourishment. It is really tough with limited resources and a long coastline for not just the town, but the whole state of Massachusetts to prioritize. And so that's the process that would need to happen if there were momentum towards a project like that. It would have to go through the town, up to the select board, identify where are the priorities. You know, I can say that Atlantic Ave and Beach Ave, those projects, yes, beach nourishment is something to consider in both of those areas, but the erosion trends aren't as stark as they are at East Beach. And Beach Ave, for instance, isn't backed by as many public assets or as many valuable public assets. There are other types of management practices that could take place at the Nubble, particularly to improve that area. So in terms of prioritizing funds, it's just a talk with the town and the select board and identifying where things should go.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit of what he said, because if we're overlooking the construction of Charing Web in that area, like John mentioned, and to include Boston Beach, which is obviously a state-owned property, and it's ironic that, you know, they mentioned that what they did to create a fire and destroy some doing was any of us did, we enjoyed the crack. Question becomes, what can we use that to our advantage? If you're gonna, for example, I'll be swinging the numbers in your slide of $15 million. You're gonna go out and get $15 million. Why don't you try to include the state, get the state on board? So we'll try to notice the entire area. Boston Beach is having the same problems as everyone else. So why not contact our state representatives? Why not push and expand on this nourishment project to the point where we get the funds necessary from tens of millions of dollars around to all kinds of stuff? We're taxpayers. We should be able to find some sort of relief in some way with the help of the town, with the help of you people. I'd like to protect my property. I'm sure John would like to protect his. I'm sure the people over by the north want to protect theirs. How do we go about using this forum to do that? That's why we're reaching out to you.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I mean, I think you make a great point. DCR is looking at erosion on their properties, and they're looking to nourish their beaches. There would definitely be benefits in the joint project towards, you know, mobilizing one contractor for one project.
What direction we go in, as you keep that in mind as you formulate your management plan. Tie it in.
Yeah.
Find some avenue. I mean, I reached out to Representative Keating's office, and I can't get an email back to get an appointment.
Yeah.
I need your help.
Yeah. I think it's just engagement with DCR, making them a stakeholder. And having this one.
I do think we have a hard time in our industry with the word protect, though. I think part of this is, I don't think that protect is necessarily possible in terms of the long term, but we can think about the way that we manage the area and make it more resilient. So it's a really hard one, and I'm with you. I think for any of us, when we feel like a place we love is under threat, I can't necessarily, all we're thinking about is how do we protect this resource. So I think one of the ways that you are already highlighting this need is having multiple studies, having clarity in how you're managing the resource, drawing attention to the need. So this study does help in terms of highlighting the vulnerability. So when you have the conversation, it's not just this anecdotal data, right? You have concrete data about how this area is vulnerable. So these efforts, while they might feel frustrating, you're just doing another planning study, you're making forward progress. And we hear, I want to help you, but we hear your frustration everywhere we go. I mean, we have another project where we're working where people want to elevate their utilities in their basement for the sum of $5,000 and don't have the money and want the state's help to do that. Like, we're definitely hearing this everywhere we go. I wish it had this way to bring our state senators here. I really wish I did. I'd make them my friends if I could.
I'm sure we could if we reached out to Michael and I would say rep. I'm sure we could get it. Just with a little bit more notice than we.
Just two quick questions. This, if you did the $16 million round up a little, that's for a 10-year storm, is that correct? Yes. So realistically, that's 1 point, you're gonna have to do it again.
Yes.
So that's 1.6 million a year, inflation adjusted, correct?
Yes, and probably increasing because of single price.
So it's like every year. Yeah. So another more. How about nearshore reefs? We're talking about doing that, dumping a bunch of railroad cars 50 feet off the beach or something, so waves will break there. Did you look at that?
We did not look at that here. I can talk a little bit about it. Nearshore reefs are intended to break wave energy so that the waves that come and hit your shoreline are less energetic and less erosive. But they unfortunately don't have any control on the water level of a storm at the end of the day. So in terms of lessening erosion to the beach, a nearshore reef would, in practice, aim to do that. But it would have no effect on the long-term prospect of East Beach and its elevation with respect to sea level. So sea level is rising. The roadway is, at, what is it, about 6 feet above sea level or something like that. And so the overwash of the road is anticipated to still increase and occur frequently. So a nearshore reef, in theory, could help to reduce erosion, but it would be fairly, localized where that benefit would be. So say you put a big island right out in front of this area, you might have an area of deposition immediate in a shadow, essentially the shadow of the waves. But areas to the east and areas to the west would now would not be in that shadow, would not get the same benefit. And that sand that starts to deposit behind that shadow would be sand that would have otherwise moved east and moved to Horseneck Road, for instance. And so
The whole length of the beach has got a lot of junkyards in town. And a lot of resources.
yeah, I mean, it's a scale of project that has not been built. I can look at it in terms of numbers and things like that to just kind of give you a sense to what it would be. But it's a kind of project that I don't think honestly is really favored from a funding standpoint and a regulatory standpoint.
I think it kind of goes in the bucket of like a silver bullet that we want to work, right? And so it does get brought up a lot, but the feasibility and challenges are even more in depth that Connor mentioned. So there's sensitive species out there, there's eelgrass, the coastal dynamics, the cost. So I don't think there's necessarily, it's not going to all of a sudden fix the problem.
Yeah. And it also probably heard your answer already, but a near shore reef or breakwater or something like that is attempting to hold on to the sediment that is already there. But we have, we already know this system is set in stone. It needs more than what it has. It's lacking sediment. So just trying to hold on to what's there is probably not.
Okay.
Sure.
So I'm Rebecca Amy with Coastal Zone Management. There's Windbrook has a series of breakwaters that they put in one area to try to buffer the shoreline. And they have a sediment starvation issue as well. So the breakwaters didn't take away the fact that they had a sediment starvation issue and still had to irrigation issue. So the breakwater, that's the stall, the sediment starvation issue, which is really a crux issue. So that's what you need to understand is, how do different options address your situation? And that would solve that. And it would be very expensive.
Or one more question, and I think we have some poster boards around too, so we can also take the last 30 minutes if some of you feel, satisfied, you may go, but we also can stand around and ask questions of Rebecca. Just you and I. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, at an earlier meeting, I understand that this work, at least, I don't know, it's just what's all or, but it was a grant that was good through June 3rd.
Yes.
So does that mean you're gone from now on? I know there were attempts to.
You still want to see us after this? I'm just trying to. Okay.
I know there were attempts to re-up for it. Has that happened?
Yeah, great question. So there was one grant from Coastal Zone Management, which the funding did close on June 30th, but a grant from MVP, Courtney here, has extended into summer. So this project is still live, essentially, for the next
Summer this year or?
Yes, this current summer. So for the next couple months. And after that, we have helped work with the town to submit a grant application to CTM again. So we'll hear about that at the end of August about.
How long did it give them to get the study completed?
How long did this study take to complete?
How long do you think it would take to finish with beach plan management and get the study completed?
The way that the grant cycle works, we had, for the one that we applied, it would go through the following June 30th. But the hope is that, we have the initial draft plan that we've worked on just internally. The hope would be to take that to the public and then have a lot more conversations and get some of those activities permitted in the spring. But that language could carry into next winter as it's established. So I think that would be part of the conversation with both municipal staff, the select board, everyone else. So.
Okay, so just to clarify, if there's any need to do it as long as you're funded with grant. And what if you, on my concern, what if this project stops short for lack of funding?
I mean,
I think we'll have to.
Yeah.
We'll have to.
Michael's gonna keep applying for as many grants as he can get.
We're very active with applying for grants because it's successful. Our Christians, so we're fingers crossed that this carries forward with coastal zone management. But this plan would be, if it weren't funded, this project would be in a draft plan format. And so there would be at least a framework that we could take to select board and continue this conversation.
there's also another grant cycle in January. There's a lot of opportunities. So I think, not to speak for Michael, but I don't think that this is stopping the draft plan and falling, getting tested on the shelf. Coastal Zone Management and MVP have both shown that they are committed to this project. The town is committed. Unfortunately, we are tied to the grant, but I'd love to keep working on the future master plan. I feel committed to it. So I think the intention is not to let it just start and stop and get it done.
You said there were 2 other meetings coming up. When and where are they? Where's the information posted?
We are we'll meet on Monday to work with the Beach Ave and Atlantic Ave groups to identify that date. But there is a listserv. Not sure how you heard about this meeting, but please put down your email and you'll hear about everything. So Maria sends out notifications about all the public hearings. So nothing on the date yet, but put your name down and we'll get to it.
Thank you.
All right, Tony.
Just a quick question. So when I did the presentation for the planning board, one of the things I was looking at is for the phase where we do nourishment, what are the funding sources? And there was a few different funding sources that I found, but I don't know, you guys probably have more expertise in that. I was wondering what types of funding sources would be available for a larger scale beach nourishment project?
Yeah, thanks. I honestly don't have a perfect answer for you, but some examples of where funding has come. There are projects in the state that have been funded by the Coastal Zone Management Office, so that is one potential source. Though they have limited funds, so the scale of projects that they've funded in the past have been up to about $2 million in projects, where this is beyond that scale. I've heard a lot of talks about can FEMA or the Army Corps construct a project too. That situation is a bit of a gray area right now. How much investment is there in beach management? And I think that beach management is right now kind of being pulled back from federal priorities. So I'm not sure if that is going to be our solution. I think there would have to be a real hard look at where funds can come from, because I think that's a tough question for such a big scale project.
Is that something that is part of this project? You will at least identify potential funding sources.
I think that the continuation of the beach management plan is actually more about the near term. So we've got this presentation here. We do plan to present to the select board on kind of this work as a whole, so that the whole town can have essentially an understanding and a conversation about what it costs to do such a project on this beach, and then maybe this is essentially to inform decisions, but there is no train that's leaving the station towards a beach management project at the moment. Question?
I was just curious, where does Westport rank statewide for these types of projects? Are we considered important, not important on a state level? Since that's probably where money would come from, it's probably not going to come locally. So
yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, but you do have Courtney and Rebecca here. I'm not sure.
No, but it's hard to answer, but I do think the fact that already this project funded shows that there is investment in interest in how to keep the conversation going. I don't think there's definitely not a ranking. Like, I don't think there's a popularity contest of towns. And I do think each municipality has its own unique set of vulnerabilities. I know you asked the question about the roadway. We're definitely both on projects where we're even talking to communities where they have other roadways that are getting sunny day flooding twice a day already. So I don't think it's a ranking or a popularity contest, but I think part of keeping the conversation going is your municipal staff who already is working hard to help keep moving.
Yeah. To John's question about, what do we prioritize, East Beach or Horseneck or Beach Ave? The state is trying to prioritize Westport or Chatham, right? That's ours. And it's the projects like this, engagement from the state, and then projects like this do set, like Justine's point earlier, this builds momentum towards something, and it gives you hard data to look to point to. So project. I think we should wrap up.
States resilience plan that is being built, and that evaluates different slides throughout the state in terms of damage during the storm and erosion. So
for anyone who didn't hear that, Courtney finished the Resilient Coast Plan.
Just to give you some context, so we got applications in recently for new grants. We have 48 applications requesting 22 million. We had less than 5. So there's huge demand. And so the Resilient Coast Plan was released in draft recently, trying to look at how we prioritize. How can the state prioritize working on these different things? And so that Resilient Coast Plan is out online in draft right now.
we're that kind of active.
On the website.
Resilient Coast Plan.
Yes. So that has a draft of how to prioritize, because it is challenging. There's a lot of demand, there's a lot of need. But how do we prioritize? You can also look up on the Coastal Resilience Grant Program website. We talk about what are the priorities and how do we rate this? And it's not based on community names. It's based on the criteria for the project. What is that project addressing? So there's a lot of information available that you can look at yourselves to help.
It's listed as Resilient Coast Initiative. If you search for it, that's what we're trying.
So we'll let you guys break up because you've been sitting in chairs for an hour and a half, and that is in itself. But we're not going anywhere, so we're happy to walk around the room, talk to anyone, not everyone like you ask a question to a large forum.
I want to say bye.
And goodbye to the people on Zoom.
Bye, folks. Thank you.